WiLing Wednesdays. We have our second half of the last session, which is mentoring, and we have a fantastic panel today. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us, but also before we get going on the substance of today, I'd just like to thank our sponsors, Beijing, BMS and Janssen Australia, without whom we could not do any of these sessions and certainly couldn't run this global organisation. So I thank them very much, and also Snow Dome Foundation in Australia, who provide the administrative support. I welcome all of our panelists today. My co-chair, Gareth Gregory, who is the lymphoma lead at Monash Health in Melbourne, Australia, with a fellow Melburnian, but on the other side of the river, as we say. Thank you, Gareth, for joining, and thank you for being one of the founding members of the Change Champions Committee for Women in Lymphoma. We also have Caron Jacobson. Welcome, Caron. Caron is the Medical Director of the Immune Effector Cell Therapy Program at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. She's also an Assistant Professor of Medicine at Harvard Medical School in Boston. And she is here today with her mentor, Dr. David Weinstock. Welcome, David. David is the Levine Family Professor at Dana-Farber Institute also, and a Professor of Medicine and Pediatrics at Harvard Medical School. He's a medical oncologist at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute and Brigham and Women's Hospital, and directs the Weinstock Lab, which is a translational research program focusing on novel therapeutics for lymphoid malignancies. Not going down in any particular order of seniority here, I have Clémentine Sarkozy also joining us from Paris this evening. Clémentine is a clinical hematologist working in a phase 1 trial unit at Gustave Roussy Hospital in Paris, and is the lymphoma translational research lab there. 8 years ago, Dr. Sarkozy spent 4 years in Lyon with her first French mentor, Gilles Salles, and Gilles introduced Clémentine to Randy Gascoigne, and as things flow on, she also then met her second mentor, Christian Steidl, who has joined us today from Vancouver. Dr. Steidl is the Research Director of the Centre for Lymphoid Cancer and Associate Vice President of Research at BC Cancer in Vancouver, as well as a Professor in the Department of Pathology and Laboratory Medicine at the University of British Columbia. And Christian's translational research group focuses on the pathogenesis of B-cell lymphomas, tumour microenvironment, and applied genomics. So with that, I will go on to our program. We are talking today about mentors and mentees, and I'll hand over to Gareth to segue into our next section.
Thank you, Eliza. So as mentioned, today is all about the mentors and the mentees, and so what we were hoping to do was put them in the spotlight now and start off with perhaps Caron and David, if I may. So as Eliza introduced, Caron, you've had time in the past where David's been a very important mentor to you, and the question we have really is, can you explain really from your perspective how being a mentee to David has started setting off your career, and questions you might have for David as to how he started mentoring you along the way, please.
Yeah. I want to thank everyone for having me, and actually thank David for volunteering me for this. And I would say that in speaking of volunteering, I feel like David has continued to volunteer, even as my career has veered from his lab, has continued to volunteer me for lots of really wonderful opportunities. And so I want to thank him for that as well. So when I came to Boston to do my fellowship at Dana-Farber, my interests were sort of both in lymphoma biology and immunology, and I did my research fellowship in a transplant immunology lab with Jerry Ritz. And when I came out and joined the lymphoma group, I was a little bit without a path. I would say I was focused on taking what I had learned about B-cell biology and trying to translate it into rational clinical trials in B-cell lymphoma. But as we all know, some of those clinical trials take off and some fizzle out. Many were fizzling out. And I think David is really terrific at identifying people who need some direction, and so he took me under his wing, and I was able to get involved in some projects that he had ongoing in his lab, where a lot of the really preclinical and basic science had already been worked out and was sort of fresh and primed to translate into a clinical trial, with that was really based on extensive patient sampling on the trial, so that we could learn as much as we could. And that was really the first project that I worked on with him. And it was in the process of translating that into K23 grant, where my first score was not as high as we would have liked, but largely because of my career development plan, that it really caused me and David to sort of take a step back and think about whether this was the right career development plan for me, really trying, on the path towards basic science and a lab to support translational research in the lymphoma clinic, or whether a better career path for me was on the clinical research side of things. And he was open, despite having invested a lot of time and energy into the former, he was open to my moving into the latter. And I think it's been really tremendous to have that kind of support, know that I didn't burn any bridges, but that I continue to have support as I grow my career in a different direction.
So I think mentoring Caron is one of the easiest things there is to do in life. She's really extraordinary at everything that she does. And that was quite apparent, from the first time I met her when she joined the fellowship after being the chief resident at Columbia. So when she was in Jerry's lab, I still maintained some contact and followed her research. And then when it was clear that she wanted to shift over more toward lymphoma therapeutics, there was this opportunity for her to get involved in a project, and she very rapidly, took over leading a technician and got a first author paper in Blood, and was on this path to, get the K and potentially have her own lab space and so on. And I think at that time that I was so focused on the idea of her following that path that I was doing a little bit too much pulling. And it's interesting, this story came to mind. A couple of weeks ago, I was walking with Marcella Maus, who's a CAR T and lymphoma investigator at MGH. She and I take a walk every once in a while around the Charles River. And we walked by a turtle on the path that, was, I guess, trying to get from one side of the path to the other. And it was just getting harassed like crazy. Bikes were going by and people were stepping on it and things like that. It was all spun around. And so Marcella, having a heart of gold, reached down and picked up the turtle and moved it over to the grass on the right side. So I, being the person who I am, said to her, well, Marcella, how do you know he wasn't trying to get to the left side of the path, right? I mean, maybe he started on the right, he's gone through all this, and he's halfway there, and now you're, and so that's kind of how I felt like my relationship with Caron was. So, I was trying to put her on the right side. And it took several conversations, with both of us being very direct and digging deep. And what was really clear is that what Caron really wanted to be was an outstanding clinical investigator, deeply rooted in the science, connected with laboratories, but not, not on my path. And once that was clear, then especially as opportunities started opening up for her around the CAR T space, it was absolutely clear that was the right thing to do. I still have these lingering thoughts around the extent to which situation, rather than purely motivation, dictates those kinds of decisions, and how, especially for a woman who has 2 children, and is a clinician who loves to see patients and an educator, but also loves research, how all those factors sort of led to a decision. But I don't know, Caron, maybe, are you willing to talk through that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I have been talking about this a little bit more recently, sort of spawned by or spurned by this this panel. And you know, it's I think it's always hard to know what is affecting you from a subconsciously, right, in terms of making your decisions. I think on its face, you know, to some extent, you think that sort of clinical research and clinical medicine, it may be more intrusive into your life because emergencies happen and things come up, and even in your personal time. But usually those are things that, you know, you work through in a half hour. You don't need to sort of leave your family at 8 o'clock at night because, you know, the gel's going to run out or something like that. So, you know, I think that I do think there's a component of you know, getting to an independent career in basic science that is very challenging for people who are trying to protect time with their family, and also have a industrious and productive career in the lab.
If I can ask Clémentine and Christian now. Clémentine, you moved your family across, or yourself across the world to go and work with Christian. And, you know, you were French in Canada and Christian's running a lab there. Can you describe, you know, the start of that and, you know, and what you saw were any of the challenges, and Christian as well, kind of bringing someone from across the world? I sense there's a little bit of pressure on that relationship as well, just to kind of, you know, guide those mentees through that a little bit. Clémentine, did you want to describe what you went through and you know, how you set yourself up over in Vancouver with Christian, and maybe
Sure.
talk?
So Christian was really very helpful from the beginning, and I think the story started even 2 years before we arrived in Vancouver. We met at ASH one day, just starting to discuss the project that was about gray zone lymphoma, so a pretty rare entities among rare disease that we are dealing with. And he agreed with me to come to Vancouver with some French biopsy that everybody later in the lab would call the French biopsy. And he helped me to build the project, to find the money to come in Vancouver with my family, and then give me some advice on where to live, how to find a nanny, how to do all the paperwork and everything. And then we finally get in Vancouver, and I remember the first day I went to the lab and it was sunny, which was pretty not really expected in Vancouver in October. And Christian just told me, just enjoy Vancouver while it's sunny right now, and go with your family to the beach, which is what we did. And yeah, this is how it started. And then Christian was extremely supportive with my husband as well, trying to find a job over there, which was not really very easy at all for a French guy, having few difficulties with the English at the beginning. And yeah, Christian was really very, very helpful in with all the how to settle in, and so it was pretty frightening, but then we made it. And it's now, I think when we look at the photo, and even when my son, that is 5 years old right now, when he talked about Vancouver, he said that he want to go back to Vancouver. He wanted to show Vancouver to his little brother. And so everybody had very good memories of that. I think it's due to Vancouver, that is a really kids-friendly and family city, but also to Christian, that has the family spirit, and that make the balance with work very, very nice and very easy.
Yeah, and I think that's important, isn't it? And so I guess, Christian, what are the biggest challenges for you as a mentor of finding and mentoring those promising females, and kind of respecting the work that needs to be done, and also the pull of family life as well?
Yeah, let me give some more detail to the start there, which was very much about family and accommodating not only the direct mentee or lab member, but right from the beginning, thinking back to myself, actually, I came to Canada 15 years ago from Germany, and I had still these images in my head when I got in contact with Clémentine more, and thought about the husband and family life and going through the excitement and challenges. And I just wanted to pass on that experience for sure. I recall that we kept quite a number of phone calls, and they were typically started by Clémentine, very excited to come. And I recall that she wanted to do her project while she was still in France, and I put the brakes on and wanted to rather talk about the setup of life and how she would adjust. And it started with science, and then we talked about family more in the end. And I just said, well, come here, and then we will have to talk about the project details. But it tells the story about Clémentine, that she came, which is rare. She came with a full setup of ideas, and which is quite rare. Also, biospecimens that was then right from the get-go, putting it rather in the space of a collaboration rather than a classical mentor-mentee relationship. At least that's how I perceived it. And maybe that was a recipe for success, that I always saw Clémentine as a colleague, an equal colleague, most of the time, I have to say. That worked very well. So now you asked, how do you start and recognize maybe from a pool of applicants? I mean, I have to be honest. It was not a classic selection in that sense that you just go through a formal interview process. I think that many of these relationships that turn out to be great are solicited or happen very naturally. In this case, it was ASH or other meetings, and I just want to say that. So sometimes it happens automatically. It doesn't fit the classic paradigm of interviews.
Do you find that too, David and Caron, that it's sometimes just these things happen, and rather than the best candidates sometimes work out that people that you weren't expecting to find or you weren't looking at the time? Or is it more strategic for you in your lab, David?
I think it's gone through a transition as I'm more established. It becomes easier, and there are more people who are interested in joining the lab. I think this gets back a little bit to a question that came up in the previous session about, how do you think about selecting or promoting female mentees as opposed to the male mentees and so on. And I think that the responses in that session were mostly people just said, I'm gender blind, and the key is to be gender blind. I thought a lot about that over the past few hours, and I think that in a way that's a very passive approach to a problem that we all recognize exists, right? If we recognize there's a problem, then I think we need to have a more active approach. So in general, I've tried to think, about the people who I have direct responsibility for, and trying to maximize each of their careers. But then beyond that, if I have an opportunity to, select someone for a talk or a chairmanship of a committee or something like that, there has to be a reason why I wouldn't pick a woman or a person from an underrepresented minority. I think that's the active approach at this point. That's really the only way that we can deal with a systemic problem. And hopefully it's not going to be like that forever. But that's the way I've thought about it.
If I may follow on with a question for you, Caron, regarding that. I find sometimes a mentee-mentor relationship evolves organically. Sometimes it's a formal email call saying, I feel like this working relationship we've got. I can learn a lot from you, and I'm just wondering, how did the mentor-mentee relationship evolve as you were becoming more senior, I guess, in your role with David? Was it a formal sort of process where you approached and said, I'd love you to take on an ongoing mentor role, or was it more of an organic evolution?
This was definitely organic, and I would say it was actually more solicited by David. That I think that's one of the gifts that he has is I'm not going to speak for myself, but identifying other people who he can help sort of bring to their full potential. So this was definitely there was nothing about this that was formal. This was only organic.
So you may not know it, but Anne LaCase is always pulling the strings. So I know she's on, but she speaks to all of the different fellows and tries to figure out exactly the right situation for them. She takes care of the people who she really cares about, and that includes many women in lymphoma. And so it was certainly Anne whispering in Karen's ear, and then Anne, telling me, I think there's an opportunity, and Karen may be interested, and so on. That catalyzed that relationship.
So I'm just the puppet.
We're all Anne's puppets.
So as Anne's puppet and Clementine as well as a mentee, I mean, you've both, you're here because of the successful relationships you've had with Christian and David, respectively. But what do you both think? And I'll ask Clementine first. The specific issues that male mentors could or should or perhaps have addressed to promote that success of female mentees, and what do you think are those kind of ongoing challenges even in successful relationships? And we're talking broadly here, not pointing any fingers. Clementine?
Well, I think the biggest challenge maybe is to transfer the talent to the leadership position. I think we are very numerous at the beginning, and at least in medical school, I think we are even 70%, I think, of women in France. I don't know if it's the same in North America, or but then the transfer to leadership position, or the switch, to guide and to become a mentor. This is where the issues start, I think.
And I would add on to that I think that like now having a leadership position, I think there has to be sort of ongoing mentorship and almost a little bit of culture shift, because I do think that women in leadership positions approach their job and their tasks a little bit differently and approach managing people a little bit differently. And it still can be an ongoing struggle even once you achieve that leadership position, because I think you are met with more sort of just people more questioning of your decisions, people acting out based on your decisions in ways that they wouldn't, I think, if a male was in the role and having the same decision, making the same decision. So I think it's about getting people there, but it's also about continuing to support them when they are there, because I think there's still even in the leadership roles, I think there is still some there's some backlash to women in some of those roles.
Christian, how do we change then as a community to kind of improve identification and retention and the promotion of women in lymphoma? I mean, I think both have said that it's getting to that next step. It's not the kind of junior role, it's the mentorship and the getting to the leadership and staying there. How do we, as a community of lymphoma and broader, academic medicine, change that?
Yeah, so that is the key question, and I want to reiterate that we just have to hit multiple dimensions here, and a successful relationship with Clémentine that is great to see, and can is a great framework to reflect on, and maybe have in a very specific example, the the things that worked and not worked, but that's obviously not enough to systemically change the system. That is also quite diverse by institution, by region, even by country, and cultural influences. So we just have to recognize that there is a very global level, and we can't rest on let's say one or two good relationships that maybe we have done a relatively decent job in let's say our labs. So that's clearly not enough. And I think two topics really come to mind. So one is education. If I think about my own reflection on the topic and how I think we all as leaders have grown over the last 10 years through a process of self-reflection, having had educational tools available to us, and we just have to be ambassadors and amplifiers for what we have received. And I think education is a very important tool for me. Then we all have different or wear different hats, and maybe have institutional leadership roles. And I think there we are hitting a different dimension where we constantly have to be have a very proactive stance. And I think it's wrong to assume that over the years there's a diffusion effect, if you will, and things will automatically equalize. I strongly think that they will not, and we just have to be really proactive about it. And there's various things that can be done in committees, but I'm a very strong believer into standing for a culture that people see that we are all part of, and that's where it most effectively changes. It might be a long time and maybe not so concrete in individual steps, but if we can stand for a culture change, that's the most sustainable and the best process with the highest chance of success. Yeah, so I agree. Education and culture change would be the buzzwords that I would like to put forward here.
So I completely agree with Christian. I think culture changing on its own is extraordinarily difficult. And I'm a big believer that changes in policy drive changes in culture. So I think what we should be advocating for are changes in policy, like the one that Chris Flowers outlined now at MD Anderson and extending across the UT system, that there has to be a female finalist basically for every posted professor position. I think that's what he said. I think term limits for leadership, if we're going to really change things over the next 10 years, but people who are chairs are averaging 20 years in their positions, that math just doesn't work. So I think there's plenty of evidence that term limits can work. There are large institutions like Mayo Clinic that have done it for a long time. I think that there's nothing wrong with using shame to really drive changes at the leadership and executive level. We've seen it for divestment related climate change and so on over the past few years. So I think there are tactics that can be taken to be active in this space.
If I may now redirect back to you, Clémentine, I guess as someone who's come through as a mentee under these mentors, how do you see your role in promoting those policy changes as well, in terms of either within your own practice, your own culture, but also within trying to affect institutional policy? Is that something that your organisation's quite proactive with currently?
I think in my institution there is a committee for female or something like that, but where only men are sitting. And So not just the top level of the hospitals change, and there is now one woman within, I think, 7 or 8 men. So they say that they want to do something, but I don't think we're really there, definitively. And as well, when we look at in the research level in France, the leaders are definitively men, and within the young, or maybe not so young anymore, but let's say, yeah, the still young population, not a lot of women wanting to do both clinic and research and be involved in the clinical trial development, etc., etc. So I think we are a little bit behind.
If I may then naturally move to you, Caron, where hopefully things are a little bit further advanced in the US. What about yourself? Do you see roles that you're taking on that are promoting gender equality within? Are there roles for people who aren't at the top leadership level, chair directors, to when they're coming through to still advocate at that level?
Yeah, and I would say that we are further along. I mean, we have a female president of Dana-Farber, and we've had women in really important leadership positions. I think, frankly, having my position in engineered cell therapies is an advance. And actually, our group. Yeah, my technical director is a woman. The vice president, both vice presidents for operations are women. My direct supervisor, Kathy Wu, is a woman. And when we had our first commercial CAR T-cell therapy ordered, we looked around the room, and so we had from nurses to IT support to the medical directors and the technical directors and the vice presidents of operation. It was an entire group of women getting our first CAR T-cell therapy to our first patient. And so I think that has all been phenomenal. It hasn't been without some effort, and hasn't been without some roadblocks. But I think that is a way that David has continued to be a mentor to me, because I know that when I do encounter one of those a roadblock at some point where I feel like I am being sort of penalized for being a woman, I can go to him and discuss it with him, come up with strategies to overcome it, and to also use him as a sounding board to make sure I'm on base. So I think we are farther along, but I think there's still room to grow. I think it's a lot about these culture shifts that have been discussed already.
Can I just ask you, how much do you think it's because these particular challenges, and I know exactly what you're talking about, and you're absolutely right that you face particular challenges, but how much is it because you're a woman, and how much is it because you're nice?
I've struggled with that too. Is it because I care more, or is it and I'm maybe a little bit less definitive because of it, or is it because I'm struck by people just more vociferously disagreeing with me? I do think it's I think it's the latter. Certainly, I take it to heart more, but I do think that there are times where my decisions are questioned in ways that wouldn't have been questioned by a male counterpart. And there are times where we're thinking about initiatives for our program and things that are being rolled out, and they have been thoughtfully rolled out, and you hit someone at the very end of the road and they throw it back at you as if this was something you thought up on a whim. And I just don't think that would happen. So just looking at our direct parallels, our transplant group, which is actually very male dominant, and I just don't think it would happen in the same way if it was a programmatic initiative that came through that pipeline.
And just to kind of spring off from something you've just said, David and Caron, I think there is a difference in the way that I think women advertise themselves or put themselves forward or don't. And I think this is the same, a lot of the, I think, leadership qualities that people think of instantly are, strong, powerful, confident, all of those things. And I know that that's shifting a little bit, but how do we take those steps to kind of promote gender equality and also other diverse groups that also are not in that category of the kind of classic outspoken, confident, older person who's used to everyone listening to them. You know, how do we promote that into those leadership roles for women and other people who are not quite in that category? Caron, do you want to start?
Well,
someone like you who's nice.
Yeah. So, I mean, I do think that we're probably in, we are in the midst of culture shift. I think people are starting to recognize that there are other traits that make good leaders, and that you know, and maybe sort of identifying traits that are on more gender neutral grounds, and sort of, I guess, dissecting out what it is we think, what it is of what we think makes a good leader, and what it is just influenced by the fact that good leaders before us were largely men. So I do think, I think we're in a shift. I think that, and I think, but I think as both David and Christian pointed out, this is going to be very, very slow unless we do something active to push it. And so I don't know that I would turn to my mentor David to think about some things that we could actively do to foster that shift, so that we can recognize an alternative set of good traits that would make good leaders.
Right. So I'm not going to mansplain to you, I think.
Oh, no. That's what I meant. This is only in seniority. This is not.
I mean, there, as you know, lymphoma doesn't exist on an island, right? We're basically a component of cancer medicine. That's a component of medicine. That's a component of basically organizational structures. And there is plenty of research, as far as I understand, on using things like 360 evaluations, you know, where you're getting feedback both from your mentors and superiors, and also from the people who report to you. And then if institutions use those kinds of evaluations in their decisions about who to put into leadership, you know, then they can gain much more insight into how well people are actually mentoring, how well they're really listening, how well they really lead, and are there other concerns. I think that hasn't sunk in medicine, right? It is exactly like you said. The person who's most like the current leader is the one who's most likely to become the next leader, and that's a huge problem.
If I may, Christian, over to you. One of the questions I've got, I guess, is, and this is a tricky one, I apologize. What specific extra values do you perceive from having a balanced department which has a higher proportion of females as opposed to the predominantly male situation in the past? Is it just diversity in general, and the idea of diversity, or are there specific qualities that you see are nurtured in that environment?
Yeah, well, thanks for the question. Maybe I take it out of the narrow context of, let's say, a lab unit or a department, but making the point and recognizing that when we talk about leadership roles that we all have, we usually have this hierarchical thinking in mind. But just to make the trivial point that you as a leader, you then interact with other leaders, and it's teamwork then at that stage, just on different levels with different tasks at hand. And I think the diversity as an asset comes through in those scenarios, where you then just think about that team that has, you know, diversity in strengths and weaknesses, and collective recognition of that, and which role we play, and that goes back to quite founded you know, science that shows that diversity then really is an asset for really the soft and the hard values in that system. And I mean, with that, it comes to no surprise that institutions who have agendas and recognition of equity, diversity, inclusion as topics. So then the gender balance that comes with that more global culture not taking away from the specific focus that is needed on women in lymphoma, obviously, but I think you should think about these teams that then have strengths and weaknesses on average. But I don't want. So Caron, you said earlier that maybe there is certain qualities that are gender neutral. Maybe that's the case, but they don't have to be gender neutral in that system, at least in my view. So even if on average, maybe there is a slight bias that on large cohorts would segregate by gender. I think even if we recognize that there's differences, as long as we compose leadership teams to be diverse, it's maybe not so important anymore. I love your point, Caron, though. But maybe it's an add-on thought on that as a system, if we compose everything nicely, it's not that important anymore.
So I think in that, we've got 3 of our new male change champions committee here with us, and all mentoring women in lymphoma very successfully, as we've seen from Clémentine and Caron today in the earlier session. And I just wonder, if we could just ask you, 2 questions, and I'll go to Gareth and then Christian and then David. Why are you here, and what would you like to see for the women in lymphoma group and community as a whole? Gareth, you get to go first.
Thanks, Eliza. I'm the youngest brother with 2 older sisters, and so I think I was set up from a younger age to sort of observe the additional challenges and crossroads decisions really that my sisters had to make that they shouldn't have. They're not in medicine, but are in other professions. And then similarly, as I've come through now, my training, having supervised both male and female clinician scientist researchers, I must say I was much more naive than I thought I was regarding the double standards that exist. Peripherally aware of a lot of the gender equality work that particularly Professor Doug Hilton at the Walter Eliza Hall Institute had been doing, to the fact that before most organisations had gender equality committees, he had already built a childcare centre on site to remove all of those barriers, the additional barriers that are there. And I guess now in trying to help promote my junior colleagues who are coming through that I've been mentoring, and I must admit have really just overcome any of these additional hurdles that I didn't even recognise prior. I was very naive to it. I wanted to learn from everyone here, really. And when I first became aware of Women in Lymphoma and the initiative, I thought this is a perfect forum in which I can learn, but also contribute and try and bring some of that locally here to assist so that our next generation of female hematology clinician scientists, it's not an exception, but a standard that they're equally represented and don't have the additional barriers at every level.
Thanks, Gareth. And Christian, why are you here, and what would you like to see for women in lymphoma? Obviously, we're all here for gender equality, but how are we going to get there?
Well, first and foremost, I feel honored that that I'm here, that I was given the opportunity to hopefully be part of that movement of change. So it wasn't really a decision to be made when I was asked. So I think that we as a society are where we are right now because of a change in our attitude to diversity and the importance of diversity, and in large parts gender diversity, I believe, has already been an engine of societal transformation and a better world. But it's not nearly enough. And there's a lot of work to do that I hope I can be part of. And specifically in the space of lymphoma, I see too many islands where maybe we have made some good strides already, but it's not the broad base that needs to be there to make it a reality for everyone. And maybe in the future, when we have succeeded, it's so natural to all of us that we don't have to that we don't have to do so much work anymore. But to get there, we have to work very hard and be catalysts of that movement. So it's an honor for me.
Thank you, Christian. And David, as the co-chair of the Change Champions Committee, final comments?
I have to do that at least once every call. I really want to see as much lymphoma cured as possible. And I think it's downright foolish for us to think we can do that with one arm tied behind our back, with one half of the talent pool, driving that innovation and discovery. I have been really fortunate to mentor just incredible women, and not just ones from the United States. So Fabiola Valverde, who had an ASH Global Award and is the lymphoma clinician at the public hospital in Guatemala City. And she had a first author blood advances paper where we're trying to develop transcriptional diagnostics. Catherine Antel is at the University of Cape Town and has been studying how to diagnose HIV-associated lymphomas faster. And she's now in my lab for a few years. Salvia Jane was a foreign medical graduate and then came to the US and now has left my lab to open her own lab at the MGH. I think all of these people have just absolutely inspired me. They've all had children during the process. Tova Day is another person, was in my lab for 7 years because she was doing incredible science, but she also had 3 kids while she was a postdoc. That's the commitment. I think that's necessary. So the more of those stories that I can drive, the better. As far as what I'd like to see from women in lymphoma, as you can see, I have a very ambitious agenda. I'd really like to see it trying to drive policy changes. And then see very solid metrics around how successful it's been, to the point where no hospital executive or lymphoma department chair wants to get an email from Judith because it can only be something bad. But that's my bias.
Thank you. And Clementine and Caron, thank you so much for sharing your own stories and being part of this organization and contributing to, lymphoma as women in lymphoma as well. And thank you to my co-chair, Gareth, today, but also to the mentors, Christian and David. And, we're so thrilled to have this initiative starting, and we look forward to many more successful mentorship relationships. I'll just wrap up now with just a couple of kind of promotions. One is we do actually have session 5. I thought that was last week, but I apologize, with some fantastic women in lymphoma presenting on indolent lymphomas, and that is Catherine Thieblemont from France and Monique Memema, and so watch out for that registration link, and also all of these sessions are recorded and the links are on the website 24 to 48 hours after. So thank you everybody for joining us today and for this lovely chat, and I've learnt so much, and I hope that everybody else has. I once again wanted to thank our 3 sponsors who made this possible. So thank you everybody. Enjoy your evening,
Eliza.
afternoon, day.
Thank you.
Thank you.